Money has a strange way of convincing people that it can rewrite the rules of life. For years, the billionaire believed the same. He bought what he wanted, silenced who he wanted, reshaped cities with the flick of his pen. If power was a god, he stood at its right hand. Yet here he was, sprawled across an imported silk sheet, his chest rising in uneven jerks, his lips drained of color, and his life slipping through his fingers like sand in a storm. The hum of machines filled the cavernous bedroom, blending with the shallow rasp of his breath. It was the sound of a man who had everything except time. 20 doctors stood around him. Not just doctors, but the finest minds in medicine. They had been flown in on private jets, their arrival faster than an ambulance could have crossed a city block. Each had a resume filled with miracles, recoveries that journalists called impossible. Some specialized in cardiac anomalies so rare that only a handful of patients in history had ever been treated. Others came from experimental laboratories where cures were tested before the world even knew the diseases existed. Yet none of them, not one, could stop what was happening on that bed. Sweat trickled down the billionaire's forehead. His body twitched as though his muscles were revolting against him. The monitors screamed in angry rhythms, warning of collapse. Assistants hovered in corners, clutching tablets and whispering updates no one really wanted to hear. In a smaller room down the hall, his children were waiting. Some cried, others argued, voices rising about control of the empire before their father was even gone. The mansion, usually a temple of order, had turned into a battlefield of silence, greed, and fear. The lead physician, a man whose signature could sway pharmaceutical stocks, stepped away from the bed. His jaw tightened, his face pale. "We've exhausted every protocol," he muttered, though the words barely reached the others. Finally, he said louder, "There's nothing left to try." For a moment, no one moved. No one spoke. Imagine it. The world's richest man surrounded by the world's smartest men and women, and all of them powerless. It was as if life itself had leaned in and whispered, "Your money is useless here, but sometimes what the brilliant overlook, the simple can see." Near the far wall, half hidden in the shadows, stood the housekeeper. She was there because she was always there, though nobody noticed. She carried the weight of the mansion in her hands, polishing the crystal glasses, scrubbing the marble floors, folding the linens that would never be wrinkled long enough for anyone to care. Her uniform smelled faintly of bleach. Her knuckles bore tiny scars from years of cleaning chemicals. To them, she was invisible, a body without a name. She hadn't meant to watch, but how could she not? A man's life was unraveling in front of her eyes. And as the doctors began to pack their tools, as defeat wrapped around the room like a heavy fog, something caught her attention. A detail, a memory. It was small, so small it slipped right past the men with million-dollar educations. But to her, it was unmistakable. Her chest tightened. Her tongue burned with the urge to speak, though every part of her screamed not to. What right did she have? Who would listen to her? Yet silence has a way of choking you when the truth is clawing inside. And before she could stop herself, the words stumbled out. "I think you're missing something." The room froze. Heads snapped toward her. The lead doctor blinked in disbelief, his voice sharp. "What did you say?" Her instinct was to shrink back, to apologize, to melt into the wall and pretend it never happened. But she didn't, because she remembered a night years ago, when her own child had been gasping for air in a clinic that smelled of mold and despair. No one had cared then either. She had learned to see signs, to catch the unspoken. She had saved her child that night. And now, staring at the billionaire, she recognized the same look, the same silent scream. She swallowed hard, her voice trembling but steady enough to cut the silence. "It's not what you think. You're treating the wrong thing." For the first time all night, the billionaire's eyes flickered open, just barely, as if somewhere inside he'd heard her too. The machines beeped, an urgent rhythm pressing into the room. The doctors shifted, some sneering, others curious but too proud to admit it. And that, right there, is where this story begins. Not with the brilliance of 20 experts, not with the arrogance of money, but with the courage of one woman who had nothing in her pockets but carried the one truth everyone else had overlooked. The room was heavy with disbelief. 20 doctors, men and women who had been called geniuses since childhood, now stood staring at a housekeeper who had dared to challenge them. Some chuckled under their breath, not even trying to hide the insult in their eyes. Others folded their arms, as if daring her to continue. The lead physician stepped forward, his expression half curiosity, half irritation, like a professor forced to listen to a student who clearly hadn't done her homework. "You think you know better than us?" he asked, his voice sharp, his words dripping with condescension. "Do you even understand who's lying on this bed? Do you have the faintest idea what we've already tried?" Her throat tightened, but she didn't back away. Fear battled with conviction inside her chest, and conviction won. She took a step closer, her shoes squeaking against the marble floor. "I know what I see," she said, softer than she intended but steady. "And I know you're missing it." The billionaire groaned, his body jerking in another spasm. The machines beeped angrily, their alarms cutting through the room like knives. Everyone's attention snapped back to the dying man. But the housekeeper didn't flinch. She kept her eyes locked on his face, the way his lips trembled, the way his breath rattled in short bursts instead of deep pulls. She recognized that rhythm. She had lived it. One of the younger doctors, a woman barely in her 30s but already celebrated in medical journals, sighed impatiently. "Please, get her out of here. We don't have time for nonsense." But the housekeeper raised her voice this time, her words carrying a fire that startled even herself. "You're drowning him with the wrong treatment. You're looking at his heart. But it's not his heart. Can't you see it?" A murmur rippled through the group. The lead physician narrowed his eyes. "And what, exactly, do you think it is?" Her hands shook as she pointed. Not at the billionaire's chest, but at his throat. "Look closer," she said. "He's choking. Not inside the lungs, here." She tapped her own neck. "It's swelling. It's cutting off his air. You keep treating his heart, but his heart is screaming because it's starving for oxygen. He's not dying of what you think. He's suffocating." The room stilled. For a split second, her words hovered in the air, fragile but undeniable. The billionaire coughed weakly, a wet, ragged sound that seemed to confirm her claim. The lead doctor frowned, turning his head toward the monitors, then toward the patient's body. "Impossible," muttered another doctor, shaking his head. "We've scanned, we've tested. There's no obstruction." But doubt had entered the room like smoke through a crack. And once it was there, it was impossible to ignore. The housekeeper stepped closer to the bed, her voice trembling, not from fear but urgency. "I've seen this before. My son had the same look, same gasps, same panic in his eyes. They said it was asthma. They treated him with everything but nothing worked because it wasn't asthma. It was an allergic reaction. His throat was closing, not his lungs. And if I hadn't forced them to look again, he would have died right there." The billionaire's body shook violently, his fingers clawing at the sheets as if he were reaching for air that wasn't there. The monitors screamed louder. The room, packed with brilliance and wealth, suddenly felt powerless again, except for her words, which now carried the weight of undeniable truth. The lead physician's eyes darted between the billionaire and the housekeeper. His pride burned in his throat. To admit she might be right meant admitting he had missed something fatal. Yet, as another strangled cough rattled the air, he felt the ground beneath his certainty cracking. "Check his airway," he barked suddenly. The younger doctors hesitated. "Sir, I said check it." His voice thundered through the room. Hands rushed into motion. A light was shone down the billionaire's throat. And then it happened. The gasp. The sudden intake of breath from one of the doctors peering inside. "There's swelling," she whispered, almost too stunned to say more. "She's right." For the first time that night, all 20 doctors froze. Not from arrogance, not from pride, but from shock. The invisible woman, the housekeeper they'd ignored for years, had just spotted what they, with all their education and power, had failed to see. The lead physician turned, his face pale, his eyes narrowing on her not with scorn anymore, but with something else, fear. The silence that followed was unbearable. It wasn't just quiet. It was thick, alive, buzzing with shame that no one dared to name. 20 doctors stood frozen, their reputations trembling under the weight of one undeniable discovery. The billionaire's throat was swelling, his airway closing like a fist, and somehow it had taken a housekeeper. Someone without a medical degree, without a title, without a voice in this room, to see it. The billionaire let out a guttural gasp, his chest heaving, eyes rolling back. Time was sprinting, dragging all of them with it. The lead physician snapped back into motion, barking orders, his tone sharp as if trying to reassert control. Prepare epinephrine. Now! His assistants fumbled with kits, hands trembling. The younger doctors rushed to follow his commands, but their eyes, those polished, confident eyes, kept flickering toward the housekeeper. For the first time, she wasn't invisible. Still, ego is a stubborn beast. The lead physician cleared his throat, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Don't think this means you were right," he muttered, low but deliberate, as if to remind everyone who held the authority in this room. We were already moving toward this conclusion. The housekeeper's jaw clenched. She wanted to scream, to tell him the truth he couldn't choke down. That if she hadn't spoken, the billionaire would already be dead. But she swallowed it, because this moment wasn't about pride. It was about life. And she wasn't going to waste a second fighting for credit when a man was seconds away from never breathing again. Syringes pierced vials, liquids drawn and pushed. One of the younger doctors injected the billionaire's arm. Another positioned a mask over his face, pumping oxygen as though they could force life back into him. The machines screamed, their alarms colliding in an orchestra of panic. The housekeeper couldn't stand still. Her instincts pulled her forward, closer to the bed, closer to the man whose lips were now turning a dangerous shade of blue. She whispered, more to herself than to anyone else, come on, fight." It wasn't logical, but the billionaire seemed to stir at her words, his chest trembling with a desperate attempt to pull in air. His eyes fluttered, half-closed but aware, locking for a second on the woman by his side. Of all the faces in that room, faces insured by billions, faces studied in magazines, it was hers he found in the blur of his suffering. The injection worked slowly, agonizingly. His throat remained swollen, but the tightness in his chest eased, just barely. A weak wheeze filled the air, proof that oxygen was finally clawing its way back into his lungs. "Again," the lead physician ordered, sweat dripping down his temples. "Another dose." And again the billionaire's body twitched, fighting. Each second was a battlefield. The housekeeper's hands gripped the rail of the bed so tightly her knuckles turned white. She remembered kneeling beside her son's bed years ago, praying between sobs, willing him to hold on long enough for help to work. That night came flooding back in every sound, every gasp. Minutes felt like hours. But finally, the billionaire's breathing steadied. Not perfect, not safe, but steadier than before. His chest rose in fuller waves, no longer the shallow jerks of a dying man. The room exhaled collectively, but no one dared to celebrate. It was far from over. His life still dangled on a thread, but for the first time the thread wasn't snapping, it was holding. And still the lead physician couldn't resist. He turned toward the others, his voice heavy with arrogance even as relief softened his features. "Good. Just as expected." The housekeeper's stomach twisted. She wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it, how pride was more important than truth. But when she glanced at the younger doctors, she saw it. Their faces. Some looked shaken, others ashamed, a few even angry at themselves. They knew. They all knew. And though none of them said it out loud, their silence was an acknowledgement that everything had shifted. The billionaire was alive not because of 20 experts, not because of their protocols, their machines, their wealth. He was alive because a woman with no title had dared to speak the words no one else could see. But deep down, she understood something chilling. Pride doesn't die as quickly as a crisis does. These doctors might save him, yes. But would they ever admit what truly happened tonight? Or would the truth itself suffocate under their need to stay untouchable? The housekeeper didn't care for recognition. She didn't care for fame or applause. What mattered was survival. Yet, as she looked at the billionaire breathing weakly, she realized something bigger. Her voice had cracked the silence of power. And once cracks appear, no wall stays unbroken forever. The machines quieted slightly, their alarms softening into a steady rhythm. But the room didn't relax. Relief in moments like this was a trap, and everyone knew it. The billionaire's chest rose and fell more steadily now, but his skin still glistened with sweat, his body still trembling with exhaustion. They had pulled him back from the edge, but just barely. One wrong move, one hesitation, and he would be gone. The lead physician straightened his coat as if that could repair the cracks in his authority. He turned toward the younger doctors, his voice clipped and authoritative. Stabilize him. We'll maintain airway management and continue to monitor. He avoided the one truth hanging over all of them, that they had been wrong, and that a housekeeper had seen what they missed. The housekeeper stayed close, though every nerve in her body told her to retreat. She had already stepped far beyond her place, already risked humiliation and punishment. If the family learned she had interfered, she could be dismissed in an instant. But something inside her, call it instinct, call it faith, kept her rooted. She couldn't walk away, not when she knew the danger wasn't over. The billionaire shifted, groaning faintly, his eyelids flickering. For the first time, the doctors leaned in, desperate to catch any sign of consciousness. His lips parted, and though no words came, the faintest sound rattled in his throat, like a plea too weak to form. Sedate him, one doctor suggested quickly, but the housekeeper shook her head before she could stop herself. No, she said firmly. Her voice startled even her. Don't sedate him. Not now. His body is fighting to stay awake. If you put him under, you'll make him lose that fight. The doctors whipped their heads toward her again. This time, their looks weren't just dismissive, they were furious. The young female doctor stepped forward, eyes blazing. Enough. You are not trained. You don't get to dictate medical decisions here. But the housekeeper didn't blink. I've seen this before, she said, her voice steady, even though her hands trembled at her sides. My son was sedated when his airway was closing, and it nearly killed him. Don't repeat that mistake. The billionaire coughed, his body jerking violently against the bed. His eyes shot open for a second, glazed but alive, and he clutched weakly at the air as though agreeing with her, begging without words. The doctors froze, their arrogance colliding with the raw evidence before them. The lead physician's jaw tightened. His pride fought a brutal war inside him, but the urgency of the moment left no room for ego. No sedation, he snapped finally. We'll hold off. The housekeeper's chest loosened in relief, but she didn't allow herself to exhale completely. This wasn't victory, it was survival. Temporary, fragile survival. She glanced at the billionaire, whose eyes fluttered shut again, and whispered silently in her heart, Stay. Don't let go. Minutes dragged like hours. The younger doctors adjusted monitors, whispered among themselves, their confidence shattered. The lead physician kept pacing, barking orders, pretending control he didn't feel. And the housekeeper stayed there, rooted beside the bed like an anchor, refusing to disappear back into the shadows. It wasn't long before another wave hit. The billionaire's breathing faltered again, his chest rising in shallow bursts. His skin turned ashen, his pulse spiking wildly. The machines screamed as though mocking the earlier sense of relief. He's crashing again, one doctor shouted. Panic fractured the room. Hands flew, syringes prepared, voices overlapping in frantic urgency. But in the middle of that storm, the housekeeper leaned closer, her eyes narrowing on the billionaire's face. She caught something small, fleeting, but undeniable. His lips were swollen, his skin flushed in patches. It wasn't just the throat. His whole body was at war. It's an allergic cascade, she said, louder this time. It's not just the airway, it's spreading. The lead physician froze, his face draining of color. The word struck like lightning. If she was right, the billionaire wasn't safe yet. He was minutes away from full anaphylaxis, his organs shutting down one by one. "Epinephrine, again!" he ordered, his voice cracking. The room spun into chaos. Another injection. Another rush of oxygen. Another desperate attempt to hold the billionaire in place on the thread of life. And still, as the doctors fought, the housekeeper knew one chilling truth. They were treating symptoms, but not the source. Something had triggered this, something in the air, the food, the fabric of the house. Unless they found it, he would keep spiraling again and again. Her heart pounded. She wasn't supposed to think this way, wasn't supposed to even stand here. But as the machines screamed louder and the billionaire's body arched with another violent cough, she realized. The real battle had only just begun. The room had dissolved into chaos again. The billionaire's body jerked with shallow spasms, his lips now visibly swollen, his breath hitching in uneven gasps. The alarms from the machines screamed without pause, each one sounding like a countdown to death. Doctors rushed, shouting over one another, their once controlled tones breaking into panic. Protocols were fired like bullets. Antihistamines, more oxygen, another dose of adrenaline. But the man's body was unraveling faster than they could catch it. The housekeeper stood frozen for half a second, her heart pounding, her palms clammy. Every instinct inside her screamed to move, to step forward, to say something. But another voice whispered, "Stay silent. You've already gone too far." If she spoke again, she risked more than humiliation. She risked being dragged out, silenced, erased from the scene entirely. But then her eyes fell on the billionaire's hand, clutching weakly at the sheets, knuckles white, nails digging into the fabric like a man begging for rescue. Something inside her snapped. Pride, fear, hierarchy. None of it mattered when a human being was drowning in plain sight. She forced her voice to cut through the storm. "Stop just reacting. You need to find what's causing it." Heads turned. Some scowled, others ignored her. But she pushed on, her words tumbling out faster, stronger, desperate. "This isn't random. Allergies don't just explode out of nowhere. Something set this off, something in this house. Something he touched, ate, breathed. If you don't find it, he'll crash again. And next time, you might not pull him back." The room faltered. For a second, the truth in her words outweighed the arrogance in their ears. But pride reared its head again. The young female doctor scoffed, snapping, "You're not qualified to make those calls. Let us do our job." The lead physician hesitated. His pride wanted to agree, to dismiss her as nothing more than background noise. But his instincts, the same instincts that had kept him alive through countless close calls, whispered otherwise. He turned to the others. "Check everything. His vitals, his environment, his intake in the last 12 hours. I want a sweep." The team splintered into action, combing through charts, tracing meals, medications, supplements. Assistants rushed to retrieve lists, files, anything that could point to the culprit. The housekeeper stayed rooted near the bed, her eyes darting, scanning not the papers but the room itself. She had cleaned every corner of this mansion. She knew its secrets, its patterns, its habits in ways these doctors never could. Her gaze fell on the glass of water resting on the bedside table. The billionaire's lips were dry, cracked from dehydration, but the rim of the glass shimmered faintly under the lights. She stepped closer, her stomach tightening. She had replaced that very glass hours earlier, wiping the rim with a cloth she'd used 100 times. Nothing unusual, except tonight, the cloth had smelled faintly different. She remembered the smell now, sharp, bitter, almost chemical. She thought it was just stronger detergent, maybe a new formula from the supply closet. But what if it wasn't? What if the very cloth she used to clean had carried residue? Something invisible, something deadly. Her pulse quickened. She looked at the billionaire, whose swollen lips brushed the rim of that glass earlier in the evening, desperate for water. Her voice trembled but came out firm. "The glass. Test the glass." The lead physician spun toward her, eyes narrowing. "What?" She pointed at it, her hand shaking. "On the table." He drank from it earlier. Test it. I cleaned it with a cloth tonight. Something was off. The smell wasn't right. Could be contaminated. The room paused. Even the machines seemed to hold their breath. The young female doctor rolled her eyes. This is absurd. We don't test every household item on a whim. But the billionaire suddenly convulsed again, his body arching, another violent cough ripping through him. The machines shrieked in chorus. His oxygen levels plummeted on the screen. The lead physician didn't hesitate this time. Test it. Now. An assistant grabbed the glass, sealing it quickly into a sterile bag. Another rushed it out of the room toward the in-house lab. The housekeeper's heart hammered in her chest, torn between dread and hope. Had she just saved him again? Or had she only wasted their last precious minutes chasing shadows? She pressed her trembling hand against the railing of the bed. The billionaire's eyes cracked open again. Foggy, glassy, but they landed on her. For the second time that night, out of everyone in that room, it was her he saw. And for the first time, she let herself believe. Maybe she wasn't invisible after all. Minutes stretched into eternities. Every second that ticked by carried the weight of life and death. The billionaire's body was calmer now, but not stable. His breathing shallow, his skin clammy, his chest rising and falling like it was dragging the last fragments of air out of a poisoned atmosphere. The doctors hovered, some scribbling notes, others whispering under their breath. The lead physician's gaze locked on the door. He was waiting. Everyone was. The test on the glass would either confirm the housekeeper's desperate suspicion or shatter it completely. She stood back, her fingers clenched so tightly together her knuckles blanched. She could feel the weight of their stares on her. Not just irritation now, but something sharper, heavier. If she was wrong, she wouldn't just be dismissed. She would be accused. She knew it. She had touched the glass after all. She had cleaned it. If the residue wasn't detergent, if it was poison, suspicion would fall squarely on her shoulders. The thought stabbed her chest, but she didn't flinch. Not when the man on the bed was slipping closer to death with every fragile breath. If she had to become the target to keep him alive, she would. The door burst open. An assistant rushed in, clutching the test results. His face was pale, his breath uneven. He handed the sheet to the lead physician, who scanned it, his expression darkening with every line. The silence grew unbearable. Finally, the physician's voice cut through it. Positive. Traces of an industrial cleaning agent. Highly toxic if ingested. The room erupted. Doctors cursed under their breath. The female physician shook her head in disbelief, muttering, "Impossible." Nurses exchanged panicked glances. The reality of what nearly killed the billionaire settling in like a fog. The housekeeper's stomach dropped. She knew it. That bitter smell. That off-cloth. Her suspicion was right, but the cost of being right was 1,000 new dangers. The lead physician turned sharply toward her. His eyes narrowed, suspicion glinting beneath the exhaustion. "You cleaned that glass, didn't you?" The weight of the accusation hit like a hammer. The room collectively leaned closer, waiting for her response. She swallowed hard, forcing her voice to stay steady. "Yes, I did, but I didn't poison it. I used the same cloth from the supply closet. I thought it was detergent. It smelled strange, but I never imagined." The female doctor snapped. Convenient excuse. Her chest tightened, anger burning now, fighting through the fear. "I could have stayed silent. I could have let him die. But I spoke up. I told you to test the glass. If I were guilty, why would I expose myself?" That silenced the room, if only for a heartbeat. The billionaire stirred, groaning faintly. His swollen eyes opened, drifting toward her again. He couldn't speak, but the way his gaze lingered, the faint movement of his lips. It was as if he was trying to say something only she could understand. The lead physician exhaled sharply. "For now, we stabilize him. Flush his system, monitor every organ. If we're lucky, we caught it in time." He motioned to the nurses, who surged back into action, pumping fluids, adjusting medications, recalibrating every machine. But as the chaos resumed, The undercurrent of suspicion didn't fade. It shifted. The question wasn't what poisoned him anymore. It was who left the contaminated cloth in circulation. The housekeeper's mind spun. The supply closet. She wasn't the only one with access. Dozens of staff used it every day. Maids, cleaners, even certain assistants. But what if it hadn't been an accident? What if someone had placed it there deliberately, knowing it would eventually touch the billionaire's life? Her stomach nodded. The thought was too big, too dangerous to voice. Not yet. The physician's voice snapped her out of it. We need security informed immediately. If this wasn't accidental, then someone tried to kill him. The words sent a chill across the room. Doctors, nurses, even assistants froze, their faces blanching. Attempted murder wasn't just scandal, it was war. The housekeeper's gaze dropped to her hands. Hours ago, they had been scrubbing marble floors, invisible, unnoticed. Now, those same hands had touched the piece of evidence that proved someone wanted the most powerful man in the city dead. And whether she liked it or not, those hands had placed her in the center of the storm. The billionaire coughed again, weaker this time, but his eyes didn't leave her. And she understood. If he lived through the night, she was no longer just a housekeeper. She was a witness, maybe the only one who could unravel the truth. The word security was like a gunshot in the quiet. Within minutes, the room filled with men in black suits, earpieces tucked tight, their eyes sharp and searching. The sterile air of medicine and machinery was instantly replaced with something colder. Suspicion, authority, the scent of control. The head of security, a broad-shouldered man with a scar running from his temple to his jawline, surveyed the scene like a battlefield. He didn't look at the billionaire first or even the doctors. His gaze locked on the housekeeper, as if instinct had already made its choice. "Who touched the glass?" he barked, voice like steel. She froze. Her mouth went dry. "I did," she admitted softly. Gasps rippled. The female doctor folded her arms, almost triumphant. The scarred man stepped closer, towering over her. And why would a housekeeper be handling the billionaire's glass? Her pulse hammered, but she kept her chin lifted. "Because it's my job. I clean. I tidy. I noticed something was off and spoke up. If I hadn't, you wouldn't even know what poisoned him." For a moment, the room held its breath. Then the security chief's expression shifted, not softer, but sharper. He studied her like one studies a lock before deciding how to break it. "Take her to the study," he ordered 2 guards. "We'll question her there." The billionaire let out a hoarse groan, his hand twitching against the sheets. His eyes rolled toward her, fighting to focus. The doctors rushed to soothe him, adjusting machines, but she caught that flicker of desperation in his gaze. He didn't want her taken away. He was trying to say it without words. But she couldn't resist the guards as they seized her arms, leading her out of the suffocating room into the endless hallways of the mansion. The study was dim, lined with bookshelves that stretched toward a chandelier, its golden glow failing to chase away the gloom. They sat her in a leather chair that swallowed her small frame. The security chief circled like a predator. "Tell me everything," he demanded. "From the moment you entered his quarters." Her hands trembled in her lap, but her voice steadied. She told them how she had picked up the glass, how the smell struck her as wrong, how the cloth from the supply closet had felt different in her fingers. She repeated every detail, every instinct that had led her to speak. The man leaned closer. "Or maybe you planted it. Maybe you wanted to look like a hero. Maybe you're playing the long game." Anger surged hot in her chest. "I'm not playing anything. I've spent years invisible in that house. Years scrubbing, polishing, fetching, smiling at people who never looked at me twice. If I wanted power, I wouldn't choose this. I spoke up because he was dying, and no one else saw it." Her voice cracked at the end, but it carried truth. The security chief studied her for a long moment, then leaned back. His scarred face gave nothing away. Finally, he nodded to one of his men, who slipped out of the room. "Do you know how many people had access to that closet?" he asked. She shook her head. "Dozens. Maids, cleaners, even assistants. Anyone with a pass." "Exactly," he said grimly. Which means if this was deliberate, whoever did it wanted it to look like negligence. They wanted it buried. Her stomach twisted. She whispered, "So it wasn't me they were setting up. It was all of us." The man's silence was confirmation enough. Moments later, the guard returned, whispering something into his ear. The security chief's jaw clenched. He turned back to her, eyes narrowing. The closet logs were tampered with. Someone erased entries from the last 2 nights. That doesn't happen by accident. Her breath hitched. Someone inside the house had not only placed the poison cloth but also erased the trail. Someone with access, power, and intent. The billionaire's house wasn't just under threat. It was compromised. And now, whether she wanted it or not, she was tangled in a web that stretched far beyond cleaning floors or noticing bitter smells. She wasn't just a witness anymore. She was part of the only thread left to unravel the truth. The scarred man leaned closer, lowering his voice. "If you're lying, I'll know. But if you're telling the truth, you may have just made yourself a target." The words lingered heavy in the air, more suffocating than any poison. The mansion never felt so vast, so cold, so dangerous. Every polished hallway seemed to hold secrets. Every painting on the wall watching silently. Every shadow whispering that the walls themselves knew more than the people inside them. The housekeeper sat alone in the study after the questioning ended, her wrists still aching from the grip of the guards. Through the heavy oak door, she could hear muffled voices, security men debating in clipped tones, footsteps pacing, phones buzzing with frantic calls. She wasn't in chains, but she might as well have been. Her mind wouldn't stop racing. Who had access? Who would want the billionaire dead? She thought of the other staff. Maids who worked double shifts, cooks who complained under their breath, assistants who came and went with their perfect smiles and their rehearsed politeness. But none of them, not one, seemed capable of something so deliberate. And then, a darker thought crept in. What if it wasn't staff at all? What if it was someone higher? Someone who wore silk suits instead of uniforms? Someone who had everything to gain from the billionaire's silence? The door creaked, snapping her out of her spiral. A young maid slipped in, her eyes darting nervously. She carried a tray of tea, but her trembling hands nearly spilled it. "They told me to bring this," she whispered, setting it down quickly. Then, leaning closer, her voice dropped lower. "Be careful. They're saying your name too much out there." The housekeeper's chest tightened. "What do you mean?" The maid shook her head, eyes wide. "I don't know, but I heard one of them, an assistant, not security, say you shouldn't have noticed the glass, that you were supposed to miss it." The words hit like ice water. Supposed to miss it, which meant someone had counted on her silence, her invisibility. She wasn't just an obstacle now. She was a mistake in someone's plan. Before she could ask more, the maid slipped out as quickly as she came, leaving the tea untouched. The housekeeper stared at the steaming cup, unease curling in her stomach. She didn't trust anything in this house anymore. Not food, not water, not even the air she breathed. Moments later, the scarred security chief returned, closing the door behind him. His presence filled the room. "He's stabilizing," he said, not offering comfort, only facts. "For now. But we both know this isn't over. Someone wants him gone, and they won't stop with one failed attempt." She nodded slowly, her throat dry. "And you think it's someone inside?" His jaw tightened. "I don't think. I know." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "But what I can't figure out is why you spoke up. You could have stayed quiet, and no one would have blamed you. The billionaire would have died, and your life would have gone on unnoticed. So why risk everything?" Her eyes burned. She hated how raw her voice sounded when she answered. "Because I know what it feels like to be invisible, to be unheard, to watch someone suffer while the world looks away. And I couldn't—" Her voice broke, then steadied. "I couldn't let it happen again." He studied her long and hard, his scar catching the light like a reminder of his own battles. For a moment, something softened in his expression. Respect, maybe, or reluctant belief. Then it vanished. "You realize," he said slowly, That if they know you saw what they didn't, if they know you noticed what 20 doctors missed, you've painted a target on your back. You're not just a housekeeper anymore. You're a threat. Her stomach churned. She wanted to deny it, but deep down she already knew. Outside the study, voices grew louder, arguments spilling into the hall. She caught fragments, words like inheritance, shares, control, timing. Not the language of grief, but of business, of power. The billionaire was still alive, but his empire was already being carved up in whispers. And someone, somewhere, was furious that a housekeeper had ruined the perfect plan. The chandelier above flickered, the shadows lengthening along the bookshelves. For the first time since this nightmare began, she felt it fully. Not just fear for his life, but fear for her own. The mansion's walls seemed to close in around her as she stepped lightly down the corridor, careful not to make a sound. Every creak in the floorboards was amplified in her mind. Every whisper beyond the closed doors felt like a secret meant to be overheard, a plot being woven while she was forced to remain invisible. But now she wasn't invisible. Not anymore. She had seen the poisoned glass, and she had spoken up. She had risked everything for a man who barely knew her name. And in doing so, she had become a threat to people whose pockets and pride depended on keeping him weak or gone. Through the grand windows, moonlight slashed across the polished floors, casting long shadows that seemed to crawl like fingers toward her. She stopped near the library, where the faintest murmurs drifted out into the hall. Two figures, partially hidden behind the tall shelves, spoke in hushed, clipped tones. "He was supposed to die last night," one voice said, sharp, edged with impatience. "The timing was perfect. Shares would have shifted by morning, and no one would have been suspicious." The housekeeper pressed herself against the wall, her stomach twisting. She recognized the tone. Power. Greed. The cold calculation of people who considered life and death an instrument of control. The other voice, lower, almost sly, chuckled. But someone noticed. A housekeeper. Could you believe it? She saw the glass, questioned the medicine, and practically saved him herself. It's absurd. Absurd. She bit back a shiver. Absurd to them, yes, but she knew it wasn't absurd to anyone with a conscience. The words lit a fire in her. She had to act, had to stay one step ahead, had to ensure he survived, because if he didn't, no one else in that house could be trusted to tell the truth. Footsteps behind her made her freeze. A door creaked, then slammed somewhere deep in the mansion. She wasn't alone in this house, and now she realized she was walking through a labyrinth of power and deceit, where every servant, every assistant, every relative could be an enemy or a pawn. Back in the study, the billionaire's monitors still beeped in a rhythm she had come to fear and respect. He was stable for now, but the poison had left traces, traces that spoke of intent, of someone planning and executing with precision. This wasn't a simple accident, and she knew accidents didn't leave scars like these. Her mind flashed to the family, the children, distant yet attentive, the siblings with their polished smiles, the executives with slicked-back hair and spreadsheets that decided fates faster than any doctor's hand. Any of them could have had motive. Any of them could have ensured that glass would be the instrument of death. Her fingers tightened around the edge of a marble banister. She wasn't just cleaning anymore. She wasn't just a silent observer. She was the only one who had seen the first move, and now she had to anticipate the next. The mansion groaned, settling like an ancient beast. Shadows flickered as if reacting to her thoughts, reminding her that the night was far from over. Every hallway she passed seemed to whisper, warning her, "Trust no one." She paused near a closed door, a study door that probably held files, documents, secrets. She pressed her ear against it. The words were faint, but her instincts didn't need clarity to sense danger. She can't know. If he recovers, she will ruin everything. That was the proof she needed. Someone powerful had orchestrated this from the shadows, relying on her silence to complete their plan. But she hadn't been silent. And now, she was the only one who could connect the pieces before someone else got hurt, or before the billionaire became a permanent casualty. The weight of responsibility pressed against her shoulders. Fear mingled with determination. She was just a housekeeper, yet in her hands rested a truth that could topple empires. And in the flickering light of the moon, she made a decision. She would not step back. She would not be invisible again. Somewhere in the darkness of the mansion, someone was watching, plotting, waiting. But she had seen the first move, and she wouldn't allow them to make the next without her knowing. The housekeeper's mind raced as she returned to the study, each step measured, silent, deliberate. The billionaire lay there, unconscious yet fighting, tethered to machines that monitored every fragile heartbeat. She knelt beside him, brushing a strand of hair from his damp forehead, and whispered softly, though he couldn't respond, "I won't let them hurt you. Not while I'm here." Her voice trembled, but there was steel beneath it. She had crossed a line from observer to protector, from silent servant to the only person who could see the full picture. The poison had been deliberate, the intruders calculated, but she had knowledge they didn't anticipate. And for the first time she felt the weight of her advantage. The lead physician had retreated to a corner, his face pale but controlled. He spoke quietly to his assistants, recalibrating the machines, checking the vitals over and over. Every time the billionaire coughed, a spike of fear shot through the room. But she stayed calm, her gaze sharp, absorbing every detail. She needed to know what could be used, what could be defended, and what could expose the truth. The mansion itself seemed alive that night, corridors stretching endlessly, doors hiding whispers and footsteps, shadows that threatened to move on their own. She had to move carefully. Too fast and she would reveal herself, too slow and she risked leaving the billionaire vulnerable. A soft knock at the door startled her. One of the younger nurses entered, eyes wide, holding a clipboard with medication schedules. I just wanted to check. Are we ready for the next dose?" She shook her head, her voice calm but firm. "Not yet. He needs stability first. Watch the monitors. Let me know if anything changes." The nurse hesitated but obeyed, stepping back and keeping a careful distance. The housekeeper realized in that instant how isolated she had become. Allies were cautious. Everyone was watching, some with doubt, some with fear. Even the doctors, brilliant and trained, still hesitated to trust her judgment. Her thoughts turned back to the poisoned glass, the erased logs, the whispered conspiracies she overheard in the library. Whoever had done this wasn't just careless. They were strategic, meticulous, and dangerous. And if she wanted to protect the billionaire, she would have to outthink them, anticipate their next move, and stay several steps ahead. She remembered her childhood, her early years working silently, learning to observe, to anticipate, to notice patterns that others ignored. She had spent years reading people without them realizing it. That skill, once just a survival tactic, now became a weapon. Hours passed, and the billionaire's condition slowly stabilized. The poison was out of his system, thanks to the intervention she had prompted. But the tension in the room didn't ease. If anything, it thickened. The doctors were uneasy. The staff whispered in corners, and somewhere, hidden behind wealth and power, the orchestrator of this attempted murder watched, waiting for the right moment to strike again. She stood up, her back straight, eyes scanning the room. She couldn't allow fear to rule her. Not when the life of a man, a fortune, and perhaps the truth itself depended on her vigilance. "This isn't just about saving him," she murmured to herself, voice low but resolute. "It's about uncovering the entire plan. Whoever did this, they underestimated me. But I won't let that mistake repeat." Outside, somewhere in the mansion's dark corridors, shadows moved. Footsteps, faint but deliberate, echoed in the silence. She knew it was the beginning of a game she didn't want to play, but a game she was forced to win. The housekeeper glanced once more at the billionaire, his chest rising and falling steadily now. He was alive, for now, and that meant she had time. Time to act, time to protect, time to fight, because tonight, she had realized something undeniable. She wasn't just invisible anymore, and anyone who underestimated her would soon regret it. The housekeeper slipped into the quiet of the kitchen, the hum of the refrigerators oddly comforting amidst the storm that had consumed the mansion. The night's events weighed heavily on her, but she refused to let fear control her. Every inch of the sprawling estate seemed alive with whispers and shadows, each corner holding secrets and lies. She spread her hands over the polished counter, her mind racing, calculating, mapping every possible move. She was not trained in medicine, finance, or espionage, but she had survived countless situations by noticing what others overlooked, and that skill now became her weapon. It would guide her in saving the billionaire and uncovering the traitor who had dared to strike him. Every detail mattered. Every glance, every hushed conversation, every nearly imperceptible chemical trace. These were threads in a vast, dangerous tapestry she had to untangle. The poisoned glass had been the first clue, but it was only the beginning. Erased logs, whispered schemes in shadowed corners, hidden alliances within the staff, and subtle gestures among the family, all formed a complex puzzle that could cost a life if not solved. From her apron, she drew a notepad and began jotting names, times, places, and observations. Each note represented a potential suspect, each time a recurring pattern, each location a clue to the broader plot. The mansion, once a symbol of opulence and security, had transformed into a labyrinth of secrets and betrayal. She was determined to navigate it carefully, leaving no clue unnoticed and no stone unturned. A sudden, hesitant knock at the kitchen door made her freeze. The young maid she had confided in earlier peered inside, eyes wide and hands trembling. I think I can help," she whispered. "I notice things no one else does. If you trust me, I can watch the staff, keep an eye on them, and report anything unusual." Trust was risky, but isolation was deadlier. The housekeeper considered briefly, then nodded, her voice calm but commanding. Very quietly, "Watch and report. Nothing more. Not a word to anyone." The maid swallowed hard, nodding in agreement before retreating into the shadows. Alone once more, the housekeeper returned to her notes. The pattern was clear. Whoever had tried to kill the billionaire had inside knowledge. Someone understood his routines, habits, vulnerabilities. This was not random. It was deliberate, precise, and dangerous. Every second now mattered. Above her, the billionaire rested, fragile yet alive. He had placed trust in countless doctors and aides, yet it was her intervention that had kept him breathing. That thought ignited a fierce determination. Anyone who thought of her as just a housekeeper had gravely underestimated her, and that mistake would soon prove fatal to them. Her plans solidified. She would observe, gather evidence, and predict the next move. She would move like a shadow, unnoticed but alert, transforming invisibility into strength. Every conversation, every subtle interaction in the mansion became a test, every whispered word a clue. She would expose the conspirator, understand their motives, and protect the billionaire at all costs. Doubt still crept in. The mansion was full of eyes and ears, people who had everything to gain from his death. One misstep, one careless glance, one whispered suspicion, and she could be removed entirely from the game. She drew a deep breath, steadying herself, recalling every moment her survival had depended on noticing the unseen. That skill, once a simple survival tactic, had now become a powerful tool, and the responsibility it carried pressed heavily upon her shoulders. Tonight, she was no longer merely cleaning, serving, or observing. She was a guardian, a strategist, a witness, and possibly the only person capable of preventing the deadly power games unfolding within the mansion. Closing her notepad, she whispered a vow to herself and to the man she had saved. "I'll find them, I'll stop them, and I'll make sure he lives. No second chance will be granted for what I've just prevented." The mansion had fallen into a deceptive calm as the early morning hours approached. The billionaire's condition was finally stable, his chest rising and falling steadily, monitors keeping an unbroken rhythm. But she knew stability was only temporary. The threat had not disappeared. It had only shifted, lurking in the shadows, waiting for a single moment of negligence to strike again. Moving silently through the mansion's hallways, every step deliberate, every glance intentional, she connected the dots. Names, times, patterns. all converged into one terrifying conclusion. The conspirator was someone with trusted access, someone capable of manipulating both staff and family alike. The poisoned glass, the erased logs, the whispered schemes, all pointed to a senior executive managing the billionaire's holdings, a man whose ambition rivaled his ruthlessness. She had to act with precision. One false move could destroy the evidence, allow the plot to succeed, and undo every effort to keep the billionaire alive. Her pulse raced, but her mind remained clear. She was no longer invisible. She was the axis on which the fate of the entire household now turned. Back in the study, the young maid waited anxiously. "I think I know who it is," she whispered. "But we need proof. We can't confront him blindly." Together, they devised a meticulous plan. Every step, every conversation was observed, recorded, and cross-referenced. Every routine and habit of the executive was scrutinized. The housekeeper, using her intimate knowledge of the mansion, guided the maid to observe the executive's subtle interactions, ensuring that nothing would escape their attention. Hours passed. The proof emerged. A slip of the hand, a hurried note, a pattern too precise to be coincidence. The executive had misjudged the quiet observer, assuming invisibility equaled weakness. He had been wrong. She had seen, remembered, and acted. Confrontation was inevitable. Alone in his office, the executive's confident smirk faltered when she spoke with calm authority. "It's over. We know everything. You think you have power here? You're nothing. A housekeeper, a shadow," he sneered. She stepped closer, voice unwavering. "A shadow is all it takes to illuminate the truth. You tried to kill him, but you underestimated the unseen. Justice will catch you now." The security team appeared silently behind her, evidence in hand. Logs, recordings, chemical analysis. The executive's empire crumbled instantly. The billionaire awoke, eyes hazy but lucid, and spoke with recognition, not just gratitude. "You saved me." She shook her head, fighting tears. "You would have died. I couldn't let that happen. You saw what no one else could. You didn't just save my life, you exposed the truth," he said. The mansion, once a palace of silent hierarchies, now thrummed with a new order. The conspirator removed, the staff and family left to reckon with betrayal. The housekeeper commanded quiet authority born not of wealth, but courage, intelligence, and unwavering resolve. As dawn broke, sunlight streamed across the estate. She breathed in the crisp air, victory and purpose settling in her chest. She had survived, observed, and acted, and in doing so had altered destinies. Turning to the billionaire, their relationship forged in mutual respect, she reflected on the night's journey. Poisoned glass, conspiracies, silent corridors, hidden threats. Every risk, every observation had led to this moment. Control, purpose, and an undeniable sense of triumph filled her. Yet she knew dangers remained. The world beyond the mansion's walls would always underestimate her, but she possessed the power to see, to act, to protect. She was no longer invisible. She glanced once more at the billionaire. "You saved more than my life tonight. You saved the truth. You saved justice," he whispered. She nodded, a quiet smile on her lips. As sunlight illuminated the mansion, she felt the weight of fear lift. She had been invisible once, but never again. And now, to the audience. If this story captivated you, don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment below. Sometimes, the quiet observer is the hero we least expect.